The myth of endless resilience. We've heard it all before. You're so strong, just bounce back. We're going to talk about why resilience isn't about being unbreakable, why the pressure to keep going can actually hurt us, and what true sustainable resilience looks like.
Having endless resilience is a myth.
Yeah.
I thought we just kind of had to be like unbreakable as parents or as spouses or business owners. It just seems like that you have to always be able to bounce back quickly if you want to, I don't know, get ahead or maintain your relationships or do well or what.
Yeah.
Why is that a myth?
Well, we're often told to bounce back, or the other term is to be strong and to keep going no matter what, um, but the question is then what happens when the resilience becomes more of a burden instead of a strength? I think a lot of times when we're faced with a difficult situation, whether it's a significant loss in our lives or something really sad happens, the drive or the tendency to believe that we have to bounce back very soon is kind of one of the things that we're all faced with. There's, pressure from society or from those in our circles that just expect us to kind of, if we're strong and we're resilient, we're going to kind of push through it. So I kind of wanted to kind of push back against that idea and kind of explore the dangers of glorifying endless resilience. It's kind of like extreme positivity that some people have,
Sometimes it just makes you
it's
sick
just, well,
to your
it's when
stomach.
it gets so extreme that it's clearly you're not being genuine.
Right.
And that's kind of, I think resilience is the same thing. I think we can kind of glaze over the fact that we as human beings experience emotion and go through loss and a grieving process. But sometimes we try to suppress that just to state that we're resilient people. And I would want to challenge that resilience actually doesn't mean suppressing what you're going through.
Probably means acknowledging it and addressing it in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, in society, there's a lot of, it's very common for us to have resilience pressure, which is the belief that something tragic happened, for example, and we're just expected to kind of just bounce back because we're so strong, And so we kind of have married being a resilient person with bouncing back right away from loss or tragedy. And I don't necessarily think they should be that way. I don't think strength means you ignore what you're going through,
Right.
Strength means you come out at the other end, sure, but it doesn't mean you don't go through the journey of loss and pain sometimes.
That makes sense.
So the central question I think we can all ask is what if not bouncing back immediately is actually okay?
What if it's actually a good thing?
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. So it's important to first to kind of identify, to kind of break that myth of endless resilience is first, I think we should define what really is resilience, and if we talk about it in psychological terms, resilience is really the capacity to, one, adapt to something that's come our way, whether it's a loss, whether it's a loss of any kind, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, loss of a relationship. It's the ability to adapt to that in our lives and then also recover from it. So I think we are lying to ourselves if we think a loss in our lives doesn't impact us in any way. And I think we can all, cognitively, we can say that, right? We all know that if we lose something significant in our lives, it's going to impact us somehow.
Right.
But we don't always act that way, even though we've gone through a loss and a tragedy, whatever it may be. We kind of have this tendency to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that kind of mentality, and just continue moving along in life as if nothing ever happened. And so again, resilience is that ability or the capacity to adapt to a change in our lives, and then also to recover from it in a healthy way. It doesn't mean we ignore that it happened. It just means that we've acclimated into a part of our lives and then have been able to move on in a healthy way.
Sure.
So, but the key is to note that resilience is really I like to call it, I like to identify it as being situational. What I mean by that is the degree to which we can adapt and recover, the degree to which we have resilience can really vary over time based on our maturity levels, based on our experience in life, based on what we're going through, based on the
Right.
support system we have. And so the way we react to a given situation may be different 10 years from now. But to nonetheless acknowledge that resilience can be kind of situational and vary based on the issues that we're
Well, yeah,
facing.
there's different degrees of traumatic instances. Like if you're like a spouse or a parent dies,
Yeah.
that's a lot more significant than if you
Lost a job, maybe.
lost a job.
Right. And
Yeah.
obviously, both of those things are big factors in our lives.
Right.
But they're different factors, right? So we're going to respond differently to a job loss than we would to one of our parents passing
Right.
away. You know?
There's more jobs, there's more careers that you can
Yeah.
obtain, but you cannot recover. You cannot get a loved one back if they pass away.
Well, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about trauma. I would challenge you a little bit. I believe our society nowadays overuses the word trauma way too much.
Sure.
And particularly things like post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think the better way to look at it is different levels of stress. Certainly things are traumatic to us, right? The loss of a parent is traumatic. The loss of a child is traumatic, for example. But I think we kind of cheapen that term if we apply the term trauma to any kind of
To anything that's uncomfortable.
negative distress,
Right. Yeah.
And so I think a good word to use is stress. All traumatic things
Or
are
stressful.
stressful,
Right.
but not all stressful things are traumatic.
That's
That
fair.
makes sense.
That's fair. Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to pick on people that are misusing trauma, but I think it's important to kind of redefine them a little bit.
Sure.
Otherwise, because it's that concept of if everything's traumatic,
Then nothing's
nothing is
traumatic.
traumatic. It just
Yeah.
kind of cheapens the term a little bit.
Yep. Yep.
But along those lines, I also think it's important to kind of distinguish between this idea of resilience and suppression. And I think a lot of times we equate the two. So I said resilience is that capacity to adapt and recover, right? In order to adapt to something, you have to internalize it. And when I say internalize, I mean make it a part of who you are as a person, right? We all go through experiences in our lives.
Right.
And those experiences, we have to somehow internalize them. In other words, make them a part of the fabric of our being in order to move on from them, right? For example, if we go to college and get our degree, we internalize the obtaining of that degree. And when we graduate, we become a person with a bachelor's degree or a person with a master's degree. That's internalizing professional development. The idea of resilience is much different than the suppression. So the challenge is we oftentimes equate those two, and we believe that just pushing through without healthy coping is what resilience is, and that's simply not true. That's falls along the lines of suppression, which is where we psychologically bury what we've gone through and refuse to acknowledge that it happened, for example, or refuse to acknowledge that it's impacting us in some way, shape, or form.
So you and I just got back from a retreat where we were meeting with other executives, other business owners.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of I would say it's almost like a group. It was a whole group therapy session the whole week.
Yeah.
With some executive coaches to kind of help facilitate these discussions.
Sure.
And my group was all men, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah.
And a lot of people initially, people were not the guys. I think initially we were all just kind of keeping some of the things that we were struggling with very close.
Yeah, kind of holding back,
suppressing it. And then I was kind of afraid to mention something that I was struggling with. And then it was something that was pretty heavy on my heart for years. And I said, this is what I feel about myself. And I'm thinking I'm going to be the only one.
Sure.
All these other business owners are very successful. They have it all together. And then every single one said, I feel that all the time.
Yeah.
Everyone did.
Yep.
and or not, maybe not all the time, but they said I experienced that. I feel that when this happens, it's kind of opened up the floodgates to people, to these very accomplished men,
Yeah.
to bring up stuff that they had suppressed because I think they may have felt that, well, everyone else is doing so well.
Yeah.
I gotta stuff this feeling that I have about
Everyone else
myself.
portrays that they're doing well.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even when we first started, I was listening to everyone's story about their businesses and how they're doing. Like, oh my gosh, these guys are just so far beyond accomplished than what I ever have dreamt I could be. And that's just not the case. We're actually really more on the same level than
Yeah.
than I expected, which was for
I
me.
think
That was
that's what
liberating.
really drives this myth of endless resilience, you know, is and you and I were kind of talking a little bit about it, is a lot of times when we're networking with other people, meeting people at over cocktail hour, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I call it an analog social media event, you know, which means
Yeah,
you're,
it really
everybody's
is.
portraying this very specific image of themselves, just like we do on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram. Most of the time, nobody puts the garbage they're going through. They
Right.
just don't put all the good stuff. And that's the same thing initially for a lot of these social events that we go to.
Right.
And so when somebody finally breaks the tradition, so to speak, of pretending like nothing's wrong,
Right.
suddenly we realize that, yeah, we actually, all of us are kind of going through this hard thing called life together, and
We're all
we
going
don't
through
all
it.
have it together,
Right.
you know. So again, we're kind of talking about like it's very important, to your point, to distinguish between this idea of resilience, with a healthy capacity to adapt and recover over time,
Mm-hmm.
and suppression. And a lot of times we all do, and I myself included, we confuse that idea of mindlessly pushing through something with the healthy resilience and healthy coping of it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So the problem with this all is, if we perpetuate this endless resilience narrative, and again, when I talk about endless resilience, I mean this extreme, nothing impacts me, even though it's horrible, I pulled myself up and I'm showing up to work the next day, that kind of thing.
Right.
What that does is it dismisses the real pain that we go through. And I'm going to use a word that I just said not to use, trauma. You know, if we go through traumatic experiences or high stress situations,
Mm-hmm.
if we suppress it and just push through it to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps as we're given pressure to do so,
Mm-hmm.
what that does is it dismisses the real pain and perhaps trauma that people have actually experienced in real time.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to define real quick, like what trauma is, and what would be do you have like an example, like what would be a true trauma example?
Well,
I mean, I know it's different for everybody.
I broadly categorize it in kind of major traumatic events and then lesser traumatic events, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So major trauma is obviously, I don't want to put too many parameters on it, because trauma is a very subjective thing.
Sure.
But if you bring an example of extreme trauma, you can witnessing the death of a loved one tragically,
Mm-hmm.
the sudden death of somebody that you care deeply about,
Mm-hmm.
witnessing a horrific car accident. You know, those are kind of the big major traumas you have. Other things that can be traumatic but don't rise to that level, and again, it's very subjective to each person, is, you know, getting fired from a job that you had no idea was coming. You know, that can be a traumatic event for some people on some level.
Sure.
And really, when you're talking about trauma, you're looking at something that is obviously negative,
Mm-hmm.
not enjoyable,
Right.
and something that causes extreme emotional distress or an extreme emotional reaction because of the severity of it.
Right. Sure.
And it's subjective to every person, and we all go through traumatic events, but more we look at is the person's response to that traumatic event.
Sure.
And it's really what determines, you know, how significant it is, if that makes sense.
I was just curious. I looked up a trauma definition, and it says and you're pretty much spot on. It's a severe emotional response to a stressful event that overwhelms a person's ability to process it emotionally.
Yeah. It's really where when you look at someone's response to trauma, we really kind of measure it in terms of like that primitive part of our brain that takes over. Like something is so distressful, something is so significant and so traumatic that our brainstem takes over,
Like
and shuts it all down.
we can't
to protect
process
it.
this.
Yeah, we can't deal with
do
it, so we're
this.
going to go into fight or flight mode essentially,
Right.
and pretty much shut her down. So that endless resilience narrative, it can really, like I said, it can dismiss that real pain or trauma that we go through.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that also is that that in turn leads to guilt and shame when you feel like you're not bouncing back as quickly as we're pressured to, you know?
Right.
And everybody responds to traumatic events differently, or stressful events differently. And we're in a culture where we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people.
Right.
And so if we perceive, if there's this myth of constant or endless resilience, and we feel like we're not bouncing back as quickly as we should, that in turn leads to guilt and shame, which just perpetuates the problem even further.
Right.
It also encourages things like overwork and self-neglect. So in that scenario, say someone's going through tragic loss of some kind or stressful situation of some kind, rather than taking the time that they need to recuperate, heal themselves, get back to a better state, they can kind of they would push themselves to overwork, which can then lead to self-neglect, which essentially punts the problem further down the road.
Sure.
They're going to have to deal with it some way or another.
Right.
Right. And if you don't deal with it now, it's going to get worse down the road. But
Sure.
this myth of that we must be endlessly resilient,
Mm-hmm.
i.e. suppress everything, can lead to issues of overwork and self-neglect. But then the other thing is important to remember is that if we do get in the habit, like our culture does, of suppressing things that are highly stressful, very traumatic for us, if we glaze over it and just try to bounce back, that can then mask deeper issues that need attention.
Sure.
Because essentially what we're doing is ignoring the trauma that we're going through and the emotional toll that it takes, emotional and physical toll that it takes on our bodies.
Right.
We kind of touched on it briefly last week when we talked about, burnout, essentially.
Right.
People that are in a caretaking role of any kind are very vulnerable to this idea of endless resilience, and that they must be able to push through and manage regardless of the situation. So if someone's in a caretaking field, nurses or even family members, for example, that are taking care of a very unwell loved one, they can kind of, the underlying pressure that they may put on themselves is that regardless of the situation with my caretaking role, regardless of what happens, I just need to be able to bounce back the next day and come right back and continue doing the work, even though I've been exposed to some really stressful, traumatic situations. So, so it's really important to be aware of the problems that myth creates. But then the question is, well, why do we really believe it? I think we all kind of intrinsically know that immediately bouncing back after a challenging situation is not really practical, but yet we kind of ignore that and we believe it anyway, so to speak.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And like I alluded to, I think there's a lot of societal and cultural pressures, particularly in our Western society. We have that grind culture, where you just grind it out until you make it, right?
Fake until you make it.
Fake until you make it.
Yep.
And that's extremely detrimental because it's essentially suppressing and ignoring the part of the emotional part of who we are. And all human beings, no matter how stoic we are, or no matter how stoic they may be, we all have an emotional side of ourselves that we have to acknowledge. And if we fail to acknowledge it, we're essentially suppressing it, which leads to problems down the line.
Right.
So the other reason why we believe this myth, I think, is there is a tendency in our culture, I know I'm speaking in very general terms, but just generally speaking, we tend to think that if we rest for whatever reason, therefore I am weak. We equate rest with being weak. And it's interesting if you have a conversation like, hey, how's your week going? Oh, I'm so tired. It's like being tired is a badge of honor that we wear,
right?
On our sleeve.
Right.
So how are you doing? Oh, I'm tired. It's like,
so much
well,
work.
I'm not tired. So I guess that means I'm not working as hard, right?
Right.
So
Right.
So
That's
it's an
true.
assumption. And I'm poking fun at people, right?
Right.
Because we
Yeah.
all do it.
Right.
But we kind of, when we say that, we're kind of alluding to the fact that, well, if I rest, I'm weak, and therefore weak, which really doesn't make any sense, you know.
And I would say, I mean, I'm a victim of that myself. But I would also say that being able to take time for rest and enforcing that and making that non-negotiable, that's also a sign of strength too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're saying, no, I have all this stuff to do, but I also know my limits, and I need this rest time.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to, I mean, with one example is when I used to work out on a very consistent basis.
Sure.
It would be 7 days a week. If I didn't take a rest day, I would feel like a failure.
Yeah.
I would feel like, oh my gosh, that I could have done something that day.
Mm-hmm.
And might as well do two leg days in a week.
Yeah.
Do something really stupid like that.
Yep.
But then so I got out of I stopped working out for I did kind of like a self-examination. Like, it's really been about 5 years since I really consistently worked out. I thought it was only a couple of years. Well, it was a couple of years of not working out. That happened a couple years ago.
Oh, God, yeah.
That's what it was. Like, it really was like an eye opener for me. But I'm
Yeah.
like, so then at this retreat, part of the retreat was, we're gonna be committing to make some changes in our lives, and one of my changes was, you know what, dang it, I'm gonna be working out again. I'm gonna do some form of exercise. I thought I was really smart. I thought I was really clever. Like, I'm gonna do some form of exercise, whether it be walking, whether it be jogging, whether it be resistance training, or even playing with the kids outside for half an hour every day.
Yeah.
Every day without fail. And you know what? Everyone was like, John, you might want to rewrite that one.
Yeah.
Every day.
Think a little bit.
Meaning every day.
Yeah. Every day.
I'm like, well, walking isn't that hard. I mean, I have a beautiful, walkway, walking path around my house. Like, John, you have to allow yourself rest, even if it's just walking. Because if you miss a day this is kind of a little bit of a side topic, but if you miss a day and you tell yourself, I'm going to have a goal of doing something every single day without fail, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right.
And it's hard to forgive yourself if you fail that.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, I think it's kind of a flip side of the same coin. We set ourselves up for, like you said, for failure in that regard, because if we feel like if we built in rest of any kind, somehow we're not really that dedicated.
We're not really that hardcore.
If you, for example, to use your point, if you're really serious about exercise, well, of course you would work out 8 days a week, right?
Absolutely.
Of course you would work out that much.
Twice a day.
Less is clearly you're not dedicated to
right.
it. And so that kind of feeds a perpetuation. You just kind of prove my point is we're in a culture of all or nothing.
Yep.
And it's kind of the idea of like American exceptionalism, which I think is a good thing, but I also think we can take it to the extreme,
right.
If we're not careful. The other piece about why we believe the myth of over resilience, or of endless resilience, I should say, is it seems like every episode I always pick on social media, but it's easy to pick on. But if you look at like social media, whether it's your Facebook feed, Instagram, Snapchat, they highlight dramatic comebacks. I went through this loss and I bounced back even better than before, right? But what those snippets don't show you is all the behind the scenes struggle that person has inevitably gone through.
Right.
They don't document most of the time the day in, day out grind or difficulty that they go through.
Right.
They just show you what's on the other end of it. And so when we see that, we make the assumption, most of the time incorrectly, that, well, this person just bounced back right away. And
right.
The fact of the matter is that they probably didn't.
Right.
So we've kind of picked on this myth of endless resilience. So I want to kind of take some time to reframe it and kind of identify, what does healthy resilience actually look like?
Right.
So we've identified what the problem is. Well, if somebody actually has healthy resilience, what does that look like? First is accepting that struggling is not a failure. We're all going to struggle in life with the various stresses that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that struggling is not, in and of itself, is not a sign of weakness, or it's not a sign of failure, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy resilience also means that you allow yourself time and space to heal, to both heal from something if necessary and to recover from it. And I think sometimes, or a lot of times the difficulty that we face is that initial resistance we have to accepting that we need time sometimes to regroup, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of regain clarity and to kind of recover from whatever difficulty we've gone through. Um, Healthy resilience also looks like seeking support instead of isolating. And again, a lot of times when we go through something tragic or difficult, we tend to feel that we need to do it all on our own. And
Mm-hmm.
human beings, I like to refer to us as we're herd animals. We don't do well in isolation.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we all have to be extroverts, but it does mean we need to have a support system. And if you have a support system in place, your resilience you're going to be able to recover from something
Right.
more efficiently. The other thing that's important is to set realistic expectations for recovering. If you have a parent that passed away, for example, it's probably not realistic to expect yourself to go back to work the next day,
Right.
as an extreme example. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's important to set realistic expectations for recovery.
How can people, maybe this is very subjective too, but like
Yeah.
at what point do you feel like someone could be saying, at what point would someone be able to think, okay, it's time for me to take some action steps now?
What do you mean exactly?
Like if they're struggling and they're continuing to struggle, this is something that's been affecting them for a long time, be it the death of a family member or loss of a job or just even a bout of depression. Like at what point would someone say, okay, I know I've been down here for quite a long time. It's time for me to really try to work on myself and to try to start to overcome the struggle that I was having.
So the answer to that is it's going to vary for each person. But I think what you're getting at is what's really the fine line between completely retreating
Mhm.
and isolating yourself, and then moving forward from
Right.
the tragic loss, right?
Right.
And so I think that's kind of what you're tapping into. And the answer to that is that's why you need to have a support system. So there's a very big difference in the healing process or the recovery process for somebody that is trying to do it on their own completely, and
Mhm.
someone that has a support system around them that both is there to help them and to provide the emotional support, but also to hold them accountable to an extent.
Mhm.
Are you taking care of yourself? Are you stepping out where you need to step out? Are
Right.
you doing what's healthy for you? We're all very good at identifying and supporting other people, which is why when we are the ones going through loss or something traumatic, that we need to surround ourselves with people that we trust that can both support us and help us move forward in a healthy direction.
It's good to have that. It's good to have that social circle that cares about you and to help you um recover from these setbacks or from things that are really affecting you negatively. But yeah, I would also say that, having honestly having a therapist on a regular basis to have
Mhm.
someone to talk to is also extremely beneficial. I
Yeah, therapy.
was, the more I talk to, even the more I talk to professionals, cause I'm just
Yeah.
more in the executive world and that kind
Mhm.
of thing, the more I realize that almost everybody, doesn't matter how successful they are, has a therapist.
Yeah.
And we were talking when we were at our at the retreat, we had ran into a guy, just completely random guy, a really nice guy, very
Mhm.
successful, and you would talk to this guy, you'd think that he would not have a therapist, but he does.
Yeah.
Like it's even if someone doesn't, even if you don't feel like you have a major problem,
Mhm.
a major issue, it is good to have someone who cares about you, but is also a professional that's also going to give you unbiased advice.
Right.
And man, everyone needs to have a therapist.
And therapists are unique, um, because a couple things. One, they genuinely care about people.
Right.
The vast majority of them do. Um, and number two, they're invested in your success.
Mm-hmm.
But number three, like you said, they're unbiased. So
Right.
they're not in the thick of it necessarily with you. They're not enmeshed with you. They're not in an intimate relationship with you. Certainly, therapy gets very intimate as far as the things you process and talk about. But you kind of have that. You're letting an outsider in,
Right.
and that by default, that person will have more objectivity.
Right.
And that's where therapy is really helpful for a lot
Right.
of people, not just if you're going through a significant mental health issue, but sometimes just to get perspective
Right.
on the pain you're going through and to kind of make sure you're staying on the right path, so to
Right.
speak.
Exactly.
But that's again one of the strategies for sustainable resilience, and I would say healthy resilience, is building that support network. And the thing is, you have to build that support network before something difficult happens. If you try to suddenly develop a trusting support system when you're already in the thick of it, you're going to be much further behind. It's kind of like trying to change the oil in a car as you're driving down the highway at the same time, right?
Right.
It can be done, and I'm not saying you
Theoretically.
shouldn't try, but that's why it's important to be
Right.
proactive in building a healthy support system.
Sure.
So that way, when the storm inevitably does come in your life, you have people that you can fall back on to help
Right.
pick you up.
Mhm.
You know, other strategies for sustainable resilience. Rest needs to be a practice. It shouldn't be a reaction. It should be a practice.
Mhm.
And rest can look differently for different people. Rest does not mean going to sleep. All right. Rest means taking time to let your brain clear. So what could that be? For some people, it can be going for a walk in nature. Other people could be reading, journaling, different things like this. Just
Right.
giving your mind the ability to rest from something. And it's really is acknowledging that I can't go at the pace that I'm used to going right now because of something that happened.
Right.
Another thing that's very helpful, it's simple, but it can be very difficult, is naming emotions that you're experiencing, instead of numbing them.
Like, I'm sad today,
Correct.
or I'm feeling despair today,
Exactly.
or I'm just blah.
Yeah. And sometimes when we ignore our emotions, it's the same thing as numbing. And so to pretend that emotion doesn't exist is suppressing that energy that our brains are giving us. And when we ignore it, it kind of results in that numbing, which really results in that feeling of cloudiness and not really sure what you're feeling at the time,
Right.
because your brain has been told by you that emotions aren't something I experience. So now what do I do? The brain would say. So
What do I do with this garbage
Yep.
here?
and then again, to kind of reiterate what I just said, it's important to build small daily habits that kind of help you restore your energy and your hope, so to speak. And
Mhm.
some of those things are good daily practices. When we talk about resiliency is kind of a daily process, right? It's
Mhm.
setting yourself up to engage in practices so that way, when difficult situations hit, you're able to weather the storm in a way that's healthy and in
Mhm.
a way that's efficient and optimal that will let you get back to yourself
Right.
as maybe perhaps quicker. Again, I mentioned it's, things like journaling, practicing mindfulness, whatever that may be for you. For some people, it's reading, kind of whatever brings you rest. And a lot of times that's unique to each of us. So sometimes what people ask me is, well, what are some things I can do to practice resilience? And I can give people plenty of ideas, but it's going to be unique to each person.
Even if there's something that you want to do and it just doesn't work for you, then that's okay. Like, I've always wanted to be a journaler. I've always
Sure.
wanted to, kind of archive my life.
Mhm.
But I've honestly put way too much stress on myself for that. It's
Yeah.
kind of weird. Like, I got to fill out the entire page every day. And so then I put too much pressure on
Yeah.
myself, and so then I don't enjoy it, and so then I don't really journal a whole lot, and that's okay. I
Yeah.
mean, if I really want to write something down, I will, and I
Mhm.
do. But that's not my main. That's not my main small daily habit
Yeah.
that helps me just kind of that helps me download. That's just not my thing. And
Yeah.
I know you're an archiver. You
Yeah.
really enjoy writing.
I do.
And so it's different.
Yeah.
Different for
It's
everybody.
different for everybody. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Just to kind of back up a little bit, one thing that I would say would not build sustainable resilience is using ChatGPT as your therapist.
I've heard a lot of that,
Yeah, there's a lot.
and that honestly, it really concerns me because even though I did hear that OpenAI, they hired a psychotherapist, they hired a psychiatrist to kind of help deal with all these people who they're seeing that are in crisis, which that should tell you something.
Mhm.
They know that a lot of people are in crisis, so it's not really all that anonymous. But just saying, can it provide a lot of good tips and stuff and like give you the footnotes
It
of
could point you in the right direction.
they can point you in the right direction.
Yep.
But they're absolutely nothing. Doesn't matter how realistic AI can get. nothing replaces human connection.
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly. And for whatever reason, well, I think I know why, but in our culture, we're very individualistic, and
Mhm.
that's both a blessing and a curse. Um, we place a very strong emphasis on individual success and individual abilities and all that stuff.
Mhm.
That's all good because it gives us a lot of the freedoms that we get to enjoy in our society. But it also kind of minimizes the role that other people have in our lives, and
Mhm.
it kind of takes away from that. We're not meant to do life in isolation, and a lot of the messaging that we get um, kind of is contradictory to that.
Mhm.
Um, so, in kind of wrap it up for everybody, I just want to kind of reframe this idea of resilience, and that is resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about how you care for yourself when you do. And the
Mhm.
key with that is caring for yourself when you do break or when you're going through something difficult. Um, Again, kind of remind the myth of endless resilience is really rooted in essentially ignoring what happened and not caring for yourself. So the key is to not avoid breaking completely, but it's about will you care for yourself when that does inevitably happen? Because it's going to happen to all of us
Right.
one way or another.
Sure.
And I just want to encourage people: give yourself permission to be a human being, not a superhuman.
Right.
We're all humans. We all go through our emotional ups and downs. We all
Good
go through
point.
other ups and downs in our life, and it's important to give ourselves time to recover from those different
Sure.
things.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, Josh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Non-Static Podcast. If you want to keep the conversation going, sign up for the Non-Static newsletter at nonstatic.org. And if you or someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, you can connect with us anytime at Inspire Services at inspireservicesllc.com. Take care, keep moving forward, and as always, enjoy the journey.